They put me in that place on a Tuesday in March. My own son signed the paperwork. He used my wife's death against me, told the doctors I'd stopped eating, stopped sleeping, started forgetting things that never happened. He sat across from a psychiatrist I'd never met and described a man I didn't recognize. And because he was calm and well-dressed and knew exactly what words to use, they believed him. I was 68 years old, the founder of Caldwell Property Group, a man who'd built a real estate company from a single duplex in South Charlotte into a $55 million enterprise. And just like that, on a Tuesday in March, with a stroke of my son's pen, I became a patient. Before I tell you how all of this began, drop a comment below and let me know where you're watching from. I want to know who's sitting with me tonight, listening to an old man tell the truth. The room at Sunrise Memory Care was clean. I'll give them that. Cream walls, soft lighting, a window overlooking a garden with flowers I couldn't name. The staff were kind, professionally kind, the kind that comes with a monthly invoice. $9,000 a month, pulled directly from my accounts. Accounts my son Marcus now controlled through a power of attorney he'd obtained while I was sedated in a hospital after chest pains that, I later learned, were stress-induced and not the heart attack he'd told the facility I'd survived. I kept a small notebook hidden inside the lining of my robe. Every morning I wrote the date, the day of the week, and one sentence about something I remembered clearly. The recipe my wife Eleanor used for her lemon pound cake, the license plate of the first truck I ever owned, the exact square footage of the first property I ever sold. I wrote these things not because I was forgetting them, but because I needed to prove to myself every single morning that I hadn't forgotten them, that I was still Raymond Caldwell, that the man Marcus described to that psychiatrist did not exist. My wife had been gone for 4 months when they moved me in. Eleanor, 41 years together. She died on a Sunday, quietly, the way she did everything, and I won't pretend her death didn't break something open in me. I wasn't eating well. I wasn't sleeping through the night. I sat in her chair by the window and talked to her photograph more than I talked to living people. But grief is not incompetence. Mourning is not madness. And my son used the worst season of my life to take everything I'd built. It had started before Eleanor was even cold in the ground. I didn't see it then because I didn't want to see it. Marcus was attentive. He came by the house every other day. His wife Nicole brought casseroles I didn't eat. They offered to handle the estate paperwork, the bank calls, the insurance claims. I let them. I was grateful. I was drowning and they were there, and I made the oldest mistake a grieving man can make. I trusted the people standing closest to me without asking why they were standing so close. The power of attorney was buried inside a stack of documents. Marcus brought me 6 weeks after Eleanor's funeral. He sat at my kitchen table, explained each page briefly, pushed them toward me one at a time. I signed. I was still taking the sleeping medication the hospital had prescribed, and my concentration wasn't sharp. Marcus knew that. He'd chosen that afternoon deliberately. The psychiatric evaluation happened another 2 weeks later. A Dr. Simmons came to the house. Marcus told me it was required by the estate attorney for asset transfer purposes, a routine cognitive screening for anyone over 65 managing an estate over a certain value. I answered Dr. Simmons' questions. Some I answered slowly because the medication made me slow. Marcus sat in the corner of the room taking notes I couldn't see. Whatever Dr. Simmons wrote in his report, it was enough. Combined with Marcus's testimony, it was enough. I woke up at Sunrise Memory Care on a Wednesday morning in March, with no phone, no laptop, no way to call anyone I trusted. My personal attorney, Daniel Park, who had handled every contract Caldwell Property Group had signed for 22 years, had apparently been relieved of his position by Marcus, who informed Daniel that the family was taking a different direction with legal representation. Daniel had tried to reach me. Marcus intercepted every attempt. There was one person I expected to come. My daughter, Claire. My younger child, 34 years old. Quiet where Marcus was loud, careful where he was impulsive. The one who'd worked summers at my company, filing permits and answering phones, and who understood the business better than Marcus ever had. Claire had called after Eleanor's funeral, but Marcus had told her I wasn't taking calls. She'd driven to Charlotte from Raleigh, and Marcus had met her at the door and told her I was resting, that the doctor said I needed quiet, that it was better if she gave me space. She'd believed him because she loved me and didn't want to make things harder. And by the time she understood what was actually happening, I was already gone. Or so Marcus thought. The first 3 months at Sunrise were the worst. Not because of the facility itself, but because of the silence, the not knowing, the watching Marcus arrive every few weeks in one of the cars I'd bought, wearing one of the watches Eleanor had given me for our 30th anniversary, sitting across from me with that careful expression of practiced concern, asking how I was feeling while his eyes measured me for signs of deterioration. He needed me alive. He needed me medicated and confused, and present enough to be kept there legally but not present enough to fight. He came to me twice about the investment trust. 40% of Caldwell Property Group was held in a trust that required my biometric authorization to access. My thumbprint, my retinal scan, my live signature on a tablet. Marcus could not move that money without my body physically present at the bank. And so he came, and he smiled, and he brought Nicole, who squeezed my hand and called me Dad in a tone that made my jaw tight. "You need to come to the bank with us," Marcus told me on his third visit. "Just a routine transfer, maintenance of the trust. Nothing changes. You stay in control." I looked at my son, this man I had coached through Little League and driven to college and loaned money to 3 times before he stopped paying it back. This man who had my chin and Eleanor's eyes and absolutely none of her decency. I told him I'd think about it. He told me I didn't have much time to think. I asked him what that meant. He changed the subject. That was when I noticed her. She was pushing a cart of library books down the hallway outside my room. A volunteer, mid-30s, dark hair, pulled back, reading glasses low on her nose. I'd seen her twice before and thought nothing of it. But on the day Marcus made his comment about time, she paused outside my door, just for a second. And without looking up from the cart, she said, very quietly, almost under her breath, "Keep stalling, Dad." I didn't move. Marcus was still talking. I looked back at the woman with the cart, and she was already gone, 3 rooms down, sliding a paperback onto someone's shelf. I told myself I'd imagined it. My mind reached for the most logical explanation first, that I was tired, that the medication was playing tricks. But I'd written in my notebook that morning, the lemon pound cake recipe, the license plate, the square footage. I was not confused. I had heard what I heard. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in the dark and ran through it again and again. The voice, the words, the way she hadn't looked at me when she said it. And then I knew. I'd taught Claire to talk to me that way. When she was 7 years old, she went through a phase of being terrified of a neighbor's dog, and she'd developed a habit of giving me information sideways, talking toward the wall or down at her shoes so the neighbor wouldn't notice her telling me about the dog. She was afraid if she looked up it would alert the dog. Ridiculous, I know, but the habit stuck. Whenever she was telling me something she didn't want overheard, she talked to a fixed point near, but not at the person she was talking to. She'd done it at 15 when she told me about the boy who'd been bothering her at school. She'd done it at 22 when she told me she didn't actually want to go to law school but was afraid to tell her mother. And she'd done it at Sunrise Memory Care on a Thursday afternoon pushing a cart of library books. I said nothing. I told no one. I kept writing in my notebook, kept answering the staff's daily orientation questions, kept being the cooperative patient who gave Marcus no grounds for concern. But I watched the volunteer every time she came through. I watched the way she moved through the halls, always efficient, always purposeful, never looking directly at my room, but always, when the hallway was clear, leaving something just inside my door. A book, a folded newspaper, a cup of tea from the cart that was always slightly warmer than the others, because it had been brewed fresh just before she brought it to me specifically. On a Tuesday morning, 6 weeks after I'd recognized her, a book appeared on my bedside table while I was in physical therapy. I didn't recognize the title. Inside the front cover, tucked so flat against the binding it was nearly invisible, was a folded piece of paper. I didn't open it until after lights out. In small, precise handwriting I'd known since Claire was in the 2nd grade, it read, "Daniel has everything. Trust him. Don't sign anything. It's almost time. C." I held that paper under my blanket in the dark for a long time. My daughter, 2 years younger than Marcus, the one he'd written off as dramatic and unstable after she'd refused to support his story about my mental state. The one he'd told me, on one of his visits, had moved away and was struggling and probably wouldn't visit because she found it too difficult emotionally. He'd manufactured her absence just like he'd manufactured my incompetence. And she'd been here, walking the halls of Sunrise Memory Care with a volunteer badge and a book cart, 30 feet from my room, for months. The world outside moved without me for a while. Then it moved against Marcus. I found out later how it happened, pieced it together from Daniel and from Claire's own account after. Daniel Park had never fully walked away. When Marcus fired him, Daniel returned every document he legally had to return and kept detailed records of every communication Marcus had ever sent through their firm, records that were Daniel's property as the attorney of record. Claire had found Daniel 3 months after I disappeared into Sunrise. She'd shown up at his office on a Monday morning without an appointment and laid out everything she'd observed, everything she'd documented, every visit Marcus had denied her, every phone call intercepted, every version of events that didn't line up. Daniel had listened for 2 hours without interrupting. Then he'd said, "I've been waiting for someone to come through that door." Together they built it carefully. They couldn't move too fast. An error in procedure would give Marcus grounds to bury the case before it started. Claire used her access at the facility, first as a family advocate inquiring about volunteer positions, then as a regular volunteer, to observe my condition directly and document what she found. Not deterioration, not confusion. A man who was medicated and isolated and angry but entirely cogent. She filed detailed reports with a private physician she'd retained, reports that contradicted every word of Dr. Simmons' evaluation. Daniel tracked the money. $41,000 a month draining from my accounts into an LLC registered to Nicole Caldwell 3 weeks after Eleanor's funeral. Shell company. Payments to a marketing firm that had never run a single ad for Caldwell Property Group. Invoices for consulting services rendered by a man whose name Marcus had invented. They pulled the thread and the whole sweater came apart. I was sitting in the common room on a Thursday morning when the administrator came to tell me I had a visitor. Not Marcus. Not Nicole. A man I hadn't seen in 2 years. Daniel Park, gray at the temples now, standing in the lobby, in a dark blue suit with a leather briefcase and the kind of expression a person wears when they're about to do something they've been looking forward to for a very long time. "Mr. Caldwell," he said when they brought me out, "I have some paperwork that requires your attention." He spread the documents across the small table in the family meeting room. The door closed. No staff present. The first was a petition to revoke the power of attorney on grounds of fraud and medical misrepresentation, already filed and granted in Mecklenburg County. The second was a court order freezing all accounts under Marcus Caldwell's management pending forensic audit. The third was a letter from Sunrise Memory Care's administrator noting that a review of my admission documentation had flagged irregularities in the clinical evaluation process. Dr. Simmons, as it turned out, was not board certified in the state of North Carolina. Marcus had found him through a colleague and paid him privately. The evaluation was fraudulent from the first word. I picked up the pen Daniel placed in front of me. "I am Raymond Caldwell," I said out loud, "for no one but myself. Founder of Caldwell Property Group, Charlotte, North Carolina. I know exactly who I am." Then I signed. I walked out of Sunrise Memory Care on a Friday morning in October. The air was sharp and cool the way Carolina fall gets sharp and cool, and it hit me like cold water after a very long sleep. I stood on the front steps and breathed it in. Just breathed it, because I'd been told for months that my ability to orient myself to the outside world was compromised. The outside world felt fine to me, clear and bright and waiting. A car was parked at the end of the drive, a silver Lexus. The driver's door opened and Claire stepped out. No volunteer badge now. No reading glasses down her nose. Just my daughter in a dark green jacket, standing with her arms slightly open, and her eyes full of something I hadn't seen directed at me since Eleanor's funeral. Relief. I walked toward her and she came forward, and we met somewhere in the middle of that parking lot, and she held on, the way she used to hold on when she was small and afraid, her forehead against my shoulder, not saying anything because there wasn't anything to say yet that was as important as just standing there. "He thought you were gone, Dad," she finally said into my collar. "He really thought you were gone." "I know," I said. "That was his mistake." Across Charlotte, Marcus was having a different kind of morning. He'd woken to a call from First Bank of the Carolinas, informing him that corporate accounts under the management of Caldwell Property Group Holdings were under judicial review and had been frozen pending audit completion. His personal accounts, funded largely by transfers he'd run through the company, were flagged as well. His black card declined at a gas station on Providence Road. Nicole's supplementary card declined 30 seconds after. He drove to the bank and sat across from a branch manager who was very polite and entirely unmoved, and who informed him that no access would be granted to any account until the audit cleared, a process the court had authorized for a minimum of 60 days. He called his attorney. His attorney had already received a notice of suit from Daniel Park's office. He called 3 other attorneys. 2 didn't call back. 1 told him the case against him looked, and this was the attorney's actual word, significant. He called Nicole. Nicole reminded him that the LLC in her name, the one he'd used to move $41,000 a month out of my accounts, was technically her LLC. She was already speaking to her own lawyer. He called my cell phone, the number he'd had rerouted to his own voicemail for 2 years. Daniel had restored it to me the night before. I let it ring. 3 days later, a press statement went out under Caldwell Property Group letterhead. Raymond Caldwell, founder and rightful owner, was resuming active management of all company operations, effective immediately. All transactions executed during an unauthorized power of attorney were under review. The statement did not mention Marcus by name. It didn't need to. I held a brief press conference at the company's South End offices. I stood at a podium in front of the logo Eleanor and I had designed together 26 years ago, and I told reporters that I'd been removed from my home, from my company, and from my life through an orchestrated fraud committed while I was grieving the loss of my wife. I told them I was grateful for the judicial system and for the people who had stood by me when it would have been easier to walk away. I did not look at a camera when I said that last part. I was talking to Claire, who stood off to the side of the room, and she knew it. The reporters turned to face the exit just as Marcus arrived. He'd driven himself. No suit jacket, shirt untucked, the particular look of a man whose composure is held together by one thin thread. He pushed past a cameraman and pointed at me from across the room. "This isn't over," he said. "You were not competent. You are not competent. We were protecting you." I looked at my son across the room, and I did not raise my voice because I did not need to. Every camera in that room was already pointed at him. "Protecting me, Marcus," I said. "From what?" The thread broke. His face did something complicated and ugly, and the cameras caught all of it. His publicist, who had apparently arrived behind him, grabbed his arm. Marcus shook her off. A photographer stepped forward. Marcus shoved the photographer's camera aside, and the security guard by the door moved immediately, and that was the moment, caught on video, and posted to 4 different news sites within the hour, that Marcus Caldwell completed the destruction of any remaining public sympathy. I turned back to the microphone. "I have nothing further to add today," I said. "Thank you." The boardroom of Caldwell Property Group had a long mahogany table Eleanor had picked out herself. I sat at the head of it. 8 board members sat around it, most of whom I'd known for over a decade. Some of them had taken Marcus's calls during the past 2 years and done nothing, a fact I had noted and would address later through channels that were not this meeting. 2 of them had actively tried to reach me and been blocked by Marcus at every turn. Daniel presented the audit findings. The numbers on the screen were specific and damning. $1.8 million moved through Nicole's LLC over 22 months. $400,000 in fraudulent invoices. Judge approval for the original power of attorney obtained through a referral from a law partner who was simultaneously representing one of Marcus's personal investment interests. A conflict of interest that voided the appointment entirely. When Daniel finished, the room was quiet in the way rooms go quiet, when everyone present has understood something and nobody wants to be the first to say it out loud. I stood. As holder of 72% of voting shares in Caldwell Property Group, I moved to formally dissolve Marcus Caldwell's role as acting CEO, retroactive to the date of fraudulent appointment. I looked at the door. "Daniel," I said quietly, "please invite our final board member." The door opened. Claire walked in wearing a charcoal suit, her dark hair back, the volunteer's reading glasses gone. She carried a leather portfolio under one arm, and she walked to the empty seat at the table, without looking at any of the board members. Sat down, opened the portfolio. "This is Claire Caldwell," I said. "Holder of 20% of Caldwell Property Group shares. Transferred from Eleanor Caldwell's private trust 18 months before her passing, per a document Marcus never found because it was filed with an attorney in Raleigh whose name Marcus didn't know. Eleanor had seen something coming long before I did. Claire placed a thick document on the table. For the benefit of the board, she said, her voice steady, I have here 18 months of documented financial records, internal communications, and evidence of outside payments to Dr. Simmons, including 2 wire transfers from a personal account Marcus held that he believed was untraceable. It was not untraceable. Marcus appeared in the doorway 30 seconds later. Security had tried to stop him downstairs. He'd told them he was still CEO. Technically, in that exact moment, the vote had not yet been formally recorded. He looked at Claire. His face moved through something I can only describe as the specific horror of realizing you've been outplayed by the person you'd most completely dismissed. You, he said. You've been working against me this whole time. Claire looked at him the way Eleanor used to look at people who disappointed her profoundly. Not with anger. With a kind of sad, settled clarity. I've been working for Dad, she said. The same thing I've always done. Marcus looked at me. Dad, please. His voice dropped. I'm your son. Whatever mistakes I made, I'm your son. You can't let her do this. I looked at Marcus for a long moment. I thought about Eleanor in her chair by the window. I thought about the notebook hidden in my robe lining, the license plate, the lemon pound cake, the square footage. You used your mother's death to take everything she built, I said. And then you tried to convince the world I'd forgotten who I was. I didn't forget, Marcus. I was paying attention the whole time. I nodded to Daniel. All in favor of the motion to dismiss. 8 hands, then Claire's. The security guard stepped forward. Marcus took 2 steps back, looked at Claire one more time. She had turned her chair toward the window. Her shoulders were very still. The door closed behind him. Outside the courthouse, 6 weeks later, under a November sky, the color of old pewter, I stood on the broad stone steps and let the wind hit my face. Inside, Marcus had been sentenced to 11 years in a federal correctional facility, wire fraud, financial elder abuse, conspiracy to commit fraud upon the court, and 1 count of suborning perjury through his payments to Dr. Simmons. Nicole had negotiated a plea in exchange for full cooperation and testimony. She would serve 4 years. The LLC was dissolved. Every dollar traced back to my accounts was subject to recovery. Claire came out through the glass doors behind me and stood at my shoulder. Dad, she said, it's done. I didn't answer right away. I was thinking about Eleanor, about how she'd transferred those shares to Claire, quietly and carefully, 18 months before she died, as if she'd known. Or maybe she'd just known Marcus well enough to know that knowing was necessary. Either way, she had done what Eleanor always did. She had thought further ahead than anyone gave her credit for. Your mother, I said finally. I know, Claire said. She knew, I said. She told me, Claire said. Before she got too sick. She called me and she said, if anything happens, don't let Marcus have it all. Don't let him do to your father what he almost did to me. I turned to look at my daughter. She was looking out over the parking lot. She almost did that? I asked. Early in? Before they were married. Nicole had already started working on him. She saw what Marcus was, and she started nudging him in the direction that suited her. Mom caught it and called it by its name, and Marcus chose Nicole's version of the story instead. That's when Mom moved the shares? I thought about all the things Eleanor had never told me directly because she knew how I was about my children, how I wanted to see the best in them, how I would talk myself into forgiveness before the injury was even finished being inflicted. She knew you wouldn't see it coming, Claire said gently. She was right, I said. Claire put her hand on my arm. That's because you're not built for cruelty, Dad. It's not a flaw. She never thought it was a flaw. We stood there for a while as the parking lot slowly emptied, and the November sky went from pewter to something softer. Then I put my arm around my daughter's shoulders, and she leaned into me the way she used to when she was small, and we stood there together in the cold, and that was enough. That was more than enough. I visited Marcus once, 3 months after the sentencing. I drove myself. Signed in at the desk of the Lanesboro Correctional Institution with steady hands, gave my ID, sat in the visitation room and waited. He looked smaller. Not physically, but in the way some people go small when the structure they've built their confidence on is taken away and there's nothing left underneath it. He sat across from me and folded his hands on the table, and for a long time we didn't speak. I brought something, I said. I slid an envelope across to him. He opened it slowly. Inside was a photograph. Eleanor and Marcus at his college graduation, both of them laughing at something outside the frame. She had her hand on his face. He was looking at her the way children look at the people they trust most. He stared at it for a long time. "She loved you," I said, "without condition. You know that." He nodded slowly, not looking up. "And you threw that away for a woman who was already talking to her own lawyer before the ink dried on your plea agreement." He closed his eyes. "I'm not coming back, Marcus. I want you to understand that before I leave. This is the last conversation we'll have as father and son. When you get out, you'll be 62 years old. You'll have whatever money you've managed to hold on to, which isn't much. And you'll have whatever you can build from there on your own, the way I built everything I had. If you can do that, I'll respect it from a distance. But I am done." I stood up. "Dad," he said. His voice cracked. "I'm sorry." "I know you are," I said. "I believe that you are. But sorry is what people feel when they're caught, Marcus. And what you did to me you started planning before your mother's body was cold. I have to live with that, and so do you." I walked toward the door. The guard reached for the handle. "One more thing," I said without turning around. "Your mother moved those shares to Claire herself. Before she died, she saw you clearly, and she made a choice. Live with that too." The door opened. I walked through it, and I did not look back. Outside, the Carolina winter sun was thin but present. I sat in my car for a moment with my hands on the steering wheel, not starting the engine, just sitting. I thought about the notebook in my robe lining, about counting days in a room that smelled of cleaning products and institutional optimism, about my daughter pushing a library cart down a hallway 30 feet from my door, talking sideways at the wall the way I'd taught her to do when she was 7 years old and afraid of a dog. Then I started the car, and I drove home. This is what I want you to take from this story. Not the money recovered, not the sentences handed down, not the moment Marcus stood in that boardroom with nowhere left to go. Take this. The people who love you most are not always the ones who talk the loudest about loving you. Sometimes they're the ones in the back of the room, doing the quiet work, the careful work, the work that takes months and asks nothing in return. My daughter gave up 1.5 years of her life to save mine. She volunteered in a memory care facility to stay close to me when the law gave her no other way in. She worked alongside Daniel in the evenings after her own job, building a case file page by page, not knowing exactly when it would be enough, only knowing she wasn't stopping until it was. That is what family actually means. Not a name, not blood, not a seat at the table when the estate is divided. It's who shows up when showing up costs something real. I'm Raymond Caldwell, and I'm telling this story because I want you to know that being underestimated is not the end. Being quiet is not the same as being gone. And the people who think they've taken everything from you have never, not once in the history of the world, been right about that. If this story meant something to you, leave a comment below and tell me where you're watching from. Subscribe to mk-sweetrevenge so you don't miss what comes next. And if someone in your life is fighting the kind of fight I fought, share this with them. Let them know that the door opens. It always opens. They just have to still be standing when it does.